Our charity was established in 1922 by Major George Howson. His vision was to employ men who had been wounded and disabled during the First World War to make Remembrance poppies. Today we continue to support veterans with health conditions on their journey into employment. Each year, we help hundreds of veterans to overcome barriers and move back into work. Our history begins during the First World War. In 1914, Britain governed an empire of over 400 million people and occupied a quarter of the world's landmass. When Britain declared war on Germany in August 1914, it committed people from the whole of the empire to the fight. Soldiers from the Indian Army arrived in the Middle East and Europe within weeks of the outbreak of the war. The war was one of the deadliest in history. By 1918, between 9 and 11 million military personnel had been killed and as many as 23 million had been wounded. As casualties increased, people began to search for ways to commemorate the loss of their loved ones. In the spring of 1915, the Flanders battlefields burst into flower. That winter, poppy seeds had been thrown wide by the bombardments and churn of battle. In May 1915, John McCrae, a Canadian soldier, wrote a poem in memory of his friend who had died at Ypres. The poem was published in Punch magazine that December. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and well loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up a quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. By 1918, over 8.8 million men had served in the British Imperial Forces, including at least 5.5 million from the British Isles, 1.2 million from undivided India, 629,000 from Canada, 413,000 from Australia, 136,000 from South Africa, 128,000 from New Zealand, and 134,000 from Africa, the Caribbean, and the Far East. The idea of using poppies as symbols of the sacrifice of soldiers during the war and as a way to raise funds to support those who had suffered disability or hardship began with two different women. Moyna Bell Michael, an American teacher, read McCrae's poem just a few days before the war ended. She decided to promote the red poppy as the way for people to show their support and gratitude for the troops. In France, Anne Guérin wanted to turn the poppy into the symbol of support and remembrance. She had the brilliant idea to mass-produce artificial poppies from silk and to employ war widows living in war-torn France to make them. Guérin's attempt to persuade the American Legion to adopt the poppy fell on deaf ears. In August 1921, she met with the British Legion to persuade them to buy her silk poppies in time for Remembrance Day that November. For a contribution, people could wear a poppy in memory of a loved one. Funds raised would support the British Legion's work for veterans. Earl Haig, Britain's senior commander during the war, liked the idea. A deal was struck and a new tradition was born. The British Legion ordered 9 million silk poppies from Anne Guérin. They would be worn in return for a voluntary donation. The poppies sold out and £106,000 was raised, £3 million in today's money. But Earl Haig wanted to find a British supplier of silk poppies. George Howson had served in France during the war with the 11th Service Battalion, Hampshire Regiment. After the war, he set up the Disabled Society to campaign for better quality artificial limbs and better job prospects for disabled veterans. Hearing that the British Legion wanted to buy Remembrance poppies made in Britain, Howson proposed that the poppies should be made by disabled war veterans. He proposed setting up a factory here in the UK. The Legion agreed. In May 1922, the British Legion gave Howson £2,000 to establish a poppy-making factory. He wrote to his parents, "If the experiment is successful, it will be the start of an industry to employ 150 men. I do not think it can be a great success, but it is worth trying." Within 3 weeks of writing his letter, Howson had rented a factory near the Old Kent Road, and the first men had already started work. Since 1924, when the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VIII, made his first visit to the factory, the royal family has continued to play an important role in our history. Princess Elizabeth first visited the factory in 1946. As Queen, she has visited us 3 more times since, in 1962, 1992, and 2012. The Queen Mother visited the factory shortly after the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. Princess Anne visited in 1983. Here, she is pictured talking to Fred Gregor. Gregor was wounded in the head at the Battle of Ypres in 1915. He worked at the factory for over 40 years. By 1925, the poppy factory had outgrown the old premises in the Old Kent Road. Howson wanted to find enough land for a new factory and new housing for the workers and their families. Howson and his wife Jessie bought the old Lansdowne Brewery site here on Petersham Road, Richmond. By 1930, the factory was making nearly 30 million poppies a year. Work on a new factory building began in 1932. The new factory was finished in 1933. Building work on the flats for the factory workers and their families began in 1926. By 1931, 58 new flats had been built and 320 men, women and children lived here on the Richmond estate. The factory was not just a place to work, but a community too. The Remembrance Club hosted dinners, parties, and sporting competitions. In 1928, George Howson suggested using land outside Westminster Abbey as a place where anyone could plant a poppy in memory of a loved one. Workers from the factory sold the poppies. Over 30,000 were planted in the grass. In later years, they were replaced by crosses and other symbols. Another remembrance tradition had been established. We continue to make and supply poppy wreaths and poppies to the Royal British Legion. Today, most poppies are made by machine, but every wreath is still made by hand here in Richmond. We continue to deliver George Howson's vision of changing veterans' lives through employment. Our support now reaches far beyond the factory in Richmond. Through our employment service, we offer one-to-one support for veterans with health conditions. We support each veteran on their journey into employment and help them overcome any barriers. We now support hundreds of people into employment each year. Since piloting our employment service in 2010, we have helped over 1,500 veterans across England and Wales.